The founder and director of Olive Tree Finance, Daniela Greening, is a prominent finance and mortgage broker who consistently provides strategic advice and service to borrowers seeking to refinance for residential, investment, and even commercial property purchase. She also does refinancing, self-managed super funds and equity releases. Now, Daniela's expertise and knowledge sees her as one of the most sought-after advisors in her field. And Daniela joins us today to discuss the budget and whether it's going to be a good thing or a bad thing for homeowners. Morning, Daniela.
Hi, how you going?
Good, thanks. Excuse the salubrious surrounds of Casa del Rey in our studio due to COVID.
Well, that's all good. It's the time of the year and it's a point in history when we have to deal with these things, I think.
Yes, thankfully we've got technology. Any other time in history and it would have been a lot worse, I think.
Correct.
Now, the budget, how is your take on it for people either wanting to enter the housing market or people that are already in?
Well, there's two sort of distinct areas that came out of the budget on Tuesday night. And the first one was probably around first home buyers. So the government have offered thousands more first home buyers the ability to be able to get into the market with just the 5% deposit. And that's the home guarantee scheme, which will be made permanent and expanded from 20,000 to 50,000 places. So it's really good for first home buyers in the market.
Did we see the uptake on the initial scheme taken? Did they need to increase the spaces? Was there an overwhelming increase in that?
Yeah, so they've had a huge uptake, and historically the places were all gone in the 2021 financial year. So they've increased the scheme to 50,000, as I said, and that includes an extra 10,000 places for people who are sort of wanting to go and set down roots in regional area as well. And they haven't owned a home for the last 5 years. And so that'll be really good. And of those extra 50,000 or total 50,000, there's another 5,000 places also for single parents who only need 2% deposit to get into the market. So they're really pushing to help those first home buyers and get into the market with lots of options.
There's a lot of people who can actually service the mortgage, but it's that saving of the initial deposit where they seem to struggle. Do you think it's going to be effective with the single parent home loans? Was there much of an uptake for that?
Well, it's a new product. They had only started this time last year. There seemed to be a really good take up of that. Lots of people taking opportunity to get into the market. Single parents obviously in the market are doing the hardest because their income ratios are not as high as, say, dual income people. And so it's just that fraction harder. So I think this is a really good opportunity for them with 2% to get into the market.
Now, government programs are often seen as a dual-edged sword. So a lot of the times they're criticised for actually increasing the costs of housing because it increases their demand. Do you think they've got it right with this? And do you think that it's actually not going to increase house prices?
I think it's a bit of a balancing act for them, unfortunately. They've got to do something to help people get into the market, but then they've got to offset, obviously, for existing home buyers. There's that inflationary pressure around the interest rates. So it's sort of a fine balance. And I think there'll be people who can get into the market and get into the market with these sort of type arrangements. But the flip side is for the existing home buyers, with all the current cash that is being sort of splashed around in this budget, I sort of feel the other end of the market is that the interest rates might slightly go up over the next 2 years. So there is that offset, and we'll just have to see what the outcome is with the RBA, I think.
So if it helps those who qualify for these schemes, will it be at the disadvantage of those who don't?
There's always that, I suppose, conundrum. If there are those who are on the finite edge and don't qualify, and it's going to be, there is a small wedge of people, unfortunately, that won't qualify and then just obviously can't get into the market. So yes, there is probably a slight disadvantage from that perspective. But I think from the perspective of the bigger picture, those 50,000 people that will get access to the scheme, it's just fantastic for them.
Right. Now, given we haven't received the opposition's reply to the budget, is there anything different that you think the opposition should do, that they should put up in contrast to the coalition's budgetary goals in this area?
I think, look, the same schemes will be reflected by the Labor Party personally. I think they're great schemes. The Labor Party obviously are proactive around the low to middle income earners. And I think that the schemes will probably be reflected very similarly in policy when the Labor Party do put that forward.
Now, housing affordability is always an issue. It has been for as long as I can remember, over the last decade.
Yeah.
But every time we seem to address something that may actually bring them down, then we have an outcry for the existing homeowners that see the value of their property may be compromised or lessened. How do we balance that, Danielle?
Well, I think it's interesting because in the market we've seen property values going up regularly year on year. So even though existing property owners may be not getting the capital growth that they previously may have seen, they're still getting equitable capital growth, which I think is really important to note. And I think on the upside, if we look back at history, even though increasing interest rates or larger deposit schemes may mean property prices might slightly fall in the bigger picture, I think it's still going to be a really good outcome for genuine people who are trying to get into the market.
If interest rates do increase, how far do you think they need to go before we see people falling into that mortgage stress?
Well, it's interesting you say mortgage stress. I think that mortgages and debt were higher last year than in previous years, which I think we all are in agreement with. But I think also the funny thing was people's affordability has got better, and therefore it's been known in the RBA that there was a record number of households in Australia that were actually in advance of their mortgage repayments, sometimes up to 18 months. So even though we might see some mortgage stress in the short term for people who have only just got into the market, those people who are in the existing bracket might actually be in a slightly easier position in that they can already mitigate and address the likelihood of any increase within their mortgage repayments. But there will be some stress, I feel, and sometimes if the market hits up to, if the rates go up to somewhere between 3.5% and 4%, you might really see some stress on the market, yes.
Now, on the supply side of the housing market, given the problems we're having with building suppliers and the supply chain into it, and also now with the floods and the demands that are going to be placed on builders and so forth, will that have an impact on whether people are able to take this up? Will the prices go up exponentially because of that?
Well, we've seen it all across the market. As you said, the supply chain is the major issue. Just getting stock to build is a big issue. And obviously, as the stock becomes more scarce, it's going to go up. So yes, I do believe you're right around that there may be a stress on the market in that new to build market particularly. But I think it will start to ease off come towards middle to the end of this year as sort of the world starts to adjust more so to the COVID normal, as they're calling it. Things are going to get easier. Things are going to get easier. They inevitably will, because we've seen it in Australia already, that people are finding that sort of, level playing field that they're going to work across with COVID. So yes, I do believe that we will find a median or a level playing field, but yes, invariably in the short term, scarcity and cost will be the biggest issue.
Now, I'm going to ask you to put your crystal ball and do a bit of a gazing here. Do you think this is a vote winner for the coalition? Is this enough to either keep those doubtful or attract those that were doubtful of the coalition around this? Or do you think that there's more to be done? And if so, what would it be?
Wow, crystal balling. There's lots of policies that they've been, they came on board with on Tuesday with the budget, and purely around housing and affordability and entrance to market. I think it's a really good policy, and they'll probably win quite a few votes with that policy. But, that's not necessarily, I suppose, what all voters are going to just vote on, that particular policy. Having said that, moving forward, the only other thing that they probably haven't addressed around affordability is the rental market. So there's obviously still issues in the rental market with rents going up. So that affordability will be an issue. And I think from my perspective, if they want to, I suppose, increase their voter base, they're going the right way around it, I think, yeah.
Great. Now, there was a while there where apartments, there seemed to be an oversupply of. Is that still the case, Danielle?
It's sort of leveling out a bit. There are still quite a few apartments at the high density end, particularly around for sale. Property prices in that market have flattened out considerably. But I think it will slightly ease off. I think as people start to, particularly there's been a big growth for people moving outside the cities, so there'll be less demand on that sort of requirement. So yes, the oversupply is probably still a little bit there. I don't feel that it will continue for much longer, just purely based on market segmentation and where people are moving.
Great. So one final question, Daniela, buyers or sellers market coming up to the election and on the other side of the election, where do you think it'll go?
Well, historically leading into an election, the real estate market generally closes. People just hold tight and they sit. So if you're in a selling market after the election, I suspect is probably where you're going to want to sell, because there's going to be much more certainty around obviously who's in the government, what the policies are moving forward, and where they sit. So prior to the election, I think it's a 50-50 buyers or sellers, either or. Post-election, I suspect it'll much more be a selling market, because people will be very confident in knowing what's going to happen in the next 4 years moving forward.
Right. So Daniela Greening from Olive Tree Finance, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you too. Have a great day.
You too.